Okay, start letting everybody into the webinar. Welcome to Powerhouse Arena's virtual events. My name is Chris, I'm the events coordinator here, and I'm thrilled to welcome back Tao Lin and Sheila Heti. When Tao launched a trip here in 2018, he talked about the next novel he was writing and how it was going to be called Leaf Society. And afterwards, all we could talk about was how amazing that sounded. And I'm very proud to say that today we are launching that book. If you bought a general admission ticket, you can still use the code you received for a discounted and signed copy. I'm sharing the link to buy right now. And if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and they'll take your questions at the end of the event, and I'll introduce them now. Sheila Heti is the author of 8 books of fiction and nonfiction, including the novels Motherhood and How a Person Should Be, or How Should a Person Be, and the story collection, The Middle Stories. Tao Lin is the author of the memoir Trip, the novels Taipei and Richard Yates, and the novella Shoplifting from American Apparel, among many others. He was born in Virginia, has taught at Sarah Lawrence College's MFA program, and is the founder and editor of Moo House. I'll hand it over now.
Great, thank you. Hi, Tao.
Hi, Sheila. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I noticed that you can see how many people are in this, and I didn't want to see that, so I was moving my screen around, and I don't see it anymore.
Yeah, I'm trying not to. I was trying not to see it too. Oh, yeah, that's the way to do it. Yeah, because then you see like one person leave and then another person leave,
Yeah.
and you get self-conscious.
Yeah, I feel like I'm saying the wrong thing or something.
This is the second time I've read the book because you sent me a draft of it, and it was, I don't know how much you changed since the last time I read it, but it feels very different to read a book when it's bound than when it's on a computer. It has a different kind of authority, which is interesting. I kind of wanted to ask you about, that question about authority, because one of the things that I love about this book is you talking about Dominator society, which we're living in and have been living in for thousands of years. And that before that, there was something called partnership society. And the society that you want to leave in the title, or that the character wants to leave, is this Dominator society. And I'm curious about, like, is there something that you're thinking of when you're writing the book where you want your narrator to be, like, how do you have the authority of the writer that's not a dominator authority, you know, that's more of a partner, that's, yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Maybe I should explain the partnership dominator terms a little bit.
Okay.
I got these terms from this author, Riane Eisler. She wrote a book called The Chalice and the Blade. And in it, she argues that the two underlying models of society and of relating to each other aren't capitalist and communist or religious and secular or anything else. She argues that it's partnership and dominator. And then after arguing that, she looks at history and she argues that humans started off exemplifying the partnership model for a long time. And even after starting agriculture, she argues that people were still living in partnership societies for thousands of years. And partnership societies are characterized by being peaceful and being egalitarian with little to no sexism. And she argues, she focuses on sexism because she argues that it's the most fundamental prejudice people can have, because you can be sexist even against people in your own family. And then once that happens, you start being prejudiced against people for other reasons besides gender, like race or ethnicity. So she argues that the Dominator model, it only started around 6,500 years ago. And since then, humans have just been a dominator species big time, with there being like nonstop wars up till now. So as an author, how can I not be exemplify the dominator model? Maybe one way is to share all these ideas in a way that I'm not just telling the reader to believe my argument. And my editor helped with that, because at first in earlier drafts, I would write that Lee had learned whatever thing he'd read. And then that changed to just Lee had read whatever thing. And that allows for him being wrong. So that was one way. And then maybe including a lot of other voices, like the character Lee's parents talk a lot. And then the character Lee is also thinking of questions that he can ask his parents. And that seems more collaborative, which seems more partnership. And then the character, in terms of wanting to not embody society's sexism, he just listens to people like Riane Eisler and tries to reference many women and get the female perspective on things too, and to include that in the book. What do you think?
Yeah, I also think having the character of the dog, Dudu, be as important in the family as Lee or the mother or Mike, the brother or the father, that there's not a hierarchy of, well, this is a dog and then these are the humans, that they're all members of a family equally.
Yeah. Yeah, the characters like to include Dudu a lot and treat her as a member of the family. It feels right.
And also I think it's not a dominator novel because it doesn't try to create suspense, and I feel like suspense is kind of manipulative. Like it's like i'm trying to make you feel certain things and I'm going to control when you have the release, and there's a way of it's kind of a tool of manipulation. Whereas I feel, I read a review of the book today that you posted in the New York Times, and the critic says that one feels like they can put down the book at any time. And I feel like she wrote that a little bit as possibly a criticism, but I felt that is actually a positive thing about the book. You're not demanding attention through manipulative storytelling techniques.
Yeah, I like books that don't do that too much, like your books too. I'm rereading your next novel, which is also your fourth novel like mine. And I get that from it. And I feel like on a reread, I'm seeing the structure more and I'm more able to enjoy the form. And
Yeah, go ahead.
there was one line in your novel that I liked a lot. And I feel like it could have been in my novel too. It's a person collapsing in the street might be collapsing from any one of 100 things.
Yeah, I like that about this book, that it feels like, I think the first time I read it, when I really saw you writing it as the main thing that was going on. I saw all the stuff that you wrote about how you wrote the novel, and that was my focus. And this time reading it, what I see, I guess it's partly the way that I'm looking at books now, which is every book I read, I'm trying to sort of imagine what this book will read like in 300 years, say. And so reading your book, I feel like what it's really showing is how sick we all are, and contaminated, and this struggle to overcome that contamination, which is, yeah, I feel like if people read this book in 300 years, they're going to see how polluted we feel. But it also feels like not the beginning of the realization of that pollution, but I haven't seen a lot of novels, if any, where the project of the novel is to overcome pollution and contamination.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big theme of the novel for Lee, to try to detoxify himself. Do you think
And goes, oh, sorry.
do you think we'll be around in 300 years? Have you thought about where humanity is headed?
I think there will still be humans in 300 years, but I think obviously I think it's possible there's going to be radically fewer humans. But I don't think the human race is going to be extinct. 300 years is not that far away. What do you think?
Yeah, I can't think of any way that the whole species would be extinct. I could see there being a comet impact that could bring humans back to like they were like 10,000 years ago. And I feel like if a nuclear war happened, it wouldn't bring humans out of like industrialization. Like there would still be big cities. So I think we'll still be around.
Would you want to? Would you want to? Would you want to see it then?
Yeah, see what was happening in 300 years. Yeah. Yeah. But I feel like I got off the topic of the creating suspense. And I
Oh,
wanted to talk about that.
yeah.
Just thinking about what to say. A lot of my favorite novels don't create too much suspense, but I feel like they are still aware of wanting to keep the reader's attention and leading them somewhere, even if it's just slightly leading them. And I did try to do stuff like that in my book, and me and my editor did.
I think that humor is a big part of what keeps the reader there in this book. And for me, the family dynamic is so well drawn. Part of wanting to stay in the book, because I agree, like for me, I want to get a reader to the end of the book. That's really important, but not by suspense, by some other means. And for me, part of wanting to be in your book is wanting to be in that family. Because the way that the family talks to each other is so strange. You realize how families have these shorthands and these, like, every family has its own language. And I'm sort of curious about the language in this family, because I can't tell if it's because you're translating that the sentences are a little odd, or if it's something else. Like, for example, when the mother always says, if one of the characters says, you know, Lee won't be coming back next year, and then the mother says will, like she just changes a won't to will. So can you talk about how the language in the family works?
Yeah. My parents speak Mandarin to me, so all of the dialogue was translated. And then as I translated it, I noticed it sounded just a little weird. And sometimes it would sound like a non-native English speaker. And then sometimes I would tweak that a little because I wanted to convey that it was translated and they were speaking their native language. But then I also kept some of the awkwardness, and I like that. Yeah.
I felt kind of, I guess it's because I'm not writing a book right now. I felt kind of longing to be writing a book when I was reading this book, because you show the pleasures of that kind of absorption so much. Especially, I wanted to ask you about how you take notes, because you write a lot about taking notes. It seems like you would have a conversation with your family and then you would take notes, and then in some ways this book was built from notes. Can you just talk a little bit about what kind of notes you take?
Yeah, I've had a text file since like 2013 where it's separated by days, and for each day I've been noting the amount of drugs I use. Right now it's cannabis, coffee, and kratom. And then that helps me just control my usage and move it up or down over time. And then I'll also put the main task that I'm doing that day, like working on a book or something. And then I'll also have my to-do list there. And then most days I'll type a little about what happened. And I do it a lot less now, but during the time that the book covers, I would write a lot for each day. It fluctuated, but sometimes I would write like 3,000 words for each day. And then for 4 or 5 years, it ended up being 500,000 words. And that's what I used to write the novel with. I read through all the notes, choosing a lot of them, and it ended up being like 140,000 words that I chose. And then I just kept working on those, editing it down.
So a lot of the sentences in the final book would have been sentences from your notes that might have been edited a little bit, but the sentences would have come from your notes.
Yeah, yeah. And then there would be some passages where I would just write it not in my notes. Yeah.
Did you feel like when you fell in love, because the book, I don't think it's a spoiler, I think because you can't really spoil this book, um, do you feel like when you started falling in love, you had a sense like this can be the end of the book?
Hmm. I'm not sure if I thought about the very end when I started falling in love, but it's hard to remember. I do remember for a long time before the relationship, I was writing the book and I wasn't sure where it would end. I was just visiting my parents once a year, and I think I did that 3 times. And then I met my partner Yuka and fell in love. And in the book, I write about this a little, about the character Lee thinking about the relationship being good for his book. That sounds bad, but that's just one thought he had. Like, I think he would never be in a relationship only to write about it.
No. Well, he also talks about how being with his family is good for his book. I mean, I don't see it as bad. I see it as like you're a writer, and that means that writing is how you experience the world through writing about it. Um, and you change yourself through writing, and you understand everything through writing. And so it would make sense that you would consider how every it would make sense that you would, and because you write about your life, how can you not ask yourself about your family or about your relationship, what its relationship is to your writing? I mean, it's just the center through which it's the prism. I don't get the sense that he's in the relationship because he wants to write about it, but being in the relationship and being in love and having this new dimension of experience would change what he writes and how he feels, and that would change what he writes.
Yeah, and when he talks about how it's good for his book, he's also saying it's good for his life
Mhm.
and for his recovery. Yeah,
It's very,
that makes me think that your book, Motherhood, created some kind of suspense or a reason for the reader to keep reading, partly because of the question of motherhood, whether the narrator would become a mother or not. And I feel like my book has recovery as an overarching thing. Like you wonder whether the character is going to get better or not. What do you think about that? That's a way to keep the reader interested.
yeah, you want to know what's going to happen. I mean, I think for motherhood, like, I didn't know, I genuinely didn't know what was going to happen in my life or how I was going to resolve that question. And so it wasn't even whether or not the character is going to have a baby at the end, but how that argument is going to unfold, like what direction it's going to go in. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I mean when I say a lot of my favorite novels have something to keep you reading, but they still seem plotless to most people. But I would argue that they do have something that the reader or the writer has worked hard to give the reader something that plot could give them, but in some other way.
mhm. Yeah, I'm interested in like this book and Trip being at different points of the same book. Because you said to me that you were reading my book, The Chairs Are Where the People Go, which was also at one point the same book as How Should a Person Be?
Hmm.
And I didn't know for a long time if there were two books or one book, and they would become two books and then it would become one book and there'd be two books and one book again. And I think the reason that I ended up making them two books was because Misha said, now in retrospect it seems obvious, but at the time it wasn't obvious. He's like, the rules are different in one. Like the Misha in the Misha book is a nonfiction Misha, and the Margot in How Should a Person Be is a fictional Margot. And he's like, you can't confuse the rules by putting those two different books in the same book. And I sort of feel like there's something similar going on in your book. Like the fiction got corralled into Leaf Society, and the nonfiction got corralled into Trip, but it's the same, they have the same core of interests. And yeah, how was that process for you of figuring out whether it's two books or one book? Or
Yeah, I like your analysis of that. It does seem to me also like one book that got separated, and I don't think I remember the exact process, but at one point it was one book, and then my editor thought it wasn't working like that, and then we took it apart into two books, and I think it even got put into one book again. And then with that try, I added even more stuff, like some of my art and some of my essays. And then that didn't work either. And then finally, we decided to do it two books. And there's stuff in the fiction I couldn't do in the nonfiction, like all the dialogue. I wouldn't feel right putting that in nonfiction, because in the nonfiction, I wanted to be really strict with direct quotes.
right.
Yeah. And then in the fiction, also, I move stuff around sometimes, and I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that in a nonfiction. And then also, I write a lot about my parents and also my partner in the fiction, and it would be harder to write nonfiction so much about other people because it would affect them more, I feel like.
Do you have them read the book before the, did you have your parents and Read Leaf Society before you published it?
Not my parents.
No.
No, no. But throughout the time of the book, we would talk about it, and they would know I was writing about them, and they even knew I was recording them. And we talked about it a few times, like if there was anything I couldn't write about, and they said there wasn't. But the other people in the book, they did read it. Like my brother read it, read the parts about the character Mike and his son, and he said he was okay with it. And then my partner read it too. She's read drafts throughout the process, and she's been supportive.
Do you think I like all the stuff about, I feel like your book and my book and other books that I'm encountering now are valuing the idea of the imagination over the real in a way that I haven't seen in fiction in the last while, or at least the fiction that I am interested in. And I'm curious about your idea that your soul is reading your life as though every life is a book in a library, and your soul chose to read, or Lee's soul chose to read the book of Lee. Yeah, I'm not sure what my question is, but I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that. It's weird because I was reading your book and I was drawing my room. And you know, if you draw the corner of your room, you draw the corner and then sort of two lines like this to represent the ceiling, right? So it's kind of like a V with a line down the middle. And I realized that's also how you would draw a book, is like the seam down the middle of the book and then the two lines. And it just brought me closer to your idea that our lives are a book. If even the way that you would draw the corner of your room is the same way that you would draw a book. And I felt myself like in the room the same way that the words were in a book. But yeah, I'm curious about that idea about our lives actually literally being literature, not just turned into literature, but literature for our souls to read.
Yeah, in your novel that's coming out, you also think about spirit and spirits going in and out of bodies. With this idea of the soul being able to read lives as if they were books, I've been interested in that idea. I think it came out of after encountering Terence McKenna. He would talk a lot about how after you die, you might go into a higher dimension called the imagination. And then from that higher dimension, it could be like one of us walking into a library and being able to choose a life form instead of a book, and then open the life form and read it by living their whole life. It seems it's just a idea that seems nice. And
yeah, that your soul chose to read your life.
Yeah, and compelling too. Like it could be that way. After we die, our soul could go to someplace farther than the imagination, or it could go into a universe like a library and like live the life of anyone. And maybe while living that life, there's ways to like close the book for a moment and realize that you're just reading a life. Or maybe once you open a book, you have to read the whole thing before you can go back to being a soul.
Well, or even maybe reading books, literally reading books is a way of closing the book and realizing that you're reading a book. I mean, that's how you realize this possibility is by reading Terence McKenna and reading. I mean, that's one thing people say about reading is the reason they like reading is because they get to sort of live another life and step out of their life. And it's, you know, and the more that you look at the universe, you see all these repeating patterns. So if we are literally creatures that read books and the soul is a thing that reads us as a book and some kind of infinity repeating of that pattern. I don't know.
Yeah. Reading a book could let you read another life after you've chosen the life you've lived. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think that people that read are interested in the I mean, it's a way of being in the imagination. And I like what, you know, people really don't like the idea of other people lying around in bed, dozing, daydreaming, reading, sort of wasting their time. I mean, it's sort of my favorite thing to do is just to have no music on and not to be reading and just to be sort of idle in my thoughts. And I like how your book values that. And it says that's a legitimate place to be and that it's kind of not a higher place to be, but it's a rejuvenating place to be. And that somehow reading books and taking in art can be considered well, the question is that part of healing and recovery? And you talk literally about dreams being part of, you know, the mind recovering itself from the day and creating, reaffirming its own identity. I don't know. I haven't really seen much that's given me that feeling that lying around doing nothing but sort of thinking or reading is an okay thing to do.
Yeah, it seems okay and even good. I feel
Yeah.
like I don't do it enough. Like there have been times when I just, after getting stoned or having coffee, I just deliberately just sat there with nothing to do for like 20 minutes or deliberately tried to use my brain and just think of stuff, and I always enjoy it. I feel like I don't do that enough. Otherwise, we're just constantly occupied, it seems, especially with social media. You haven't been on Twitter for a while, it seems, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to only right now take in art forms that I think are going to be around in 300 years or media that's going to be around in a few hundred years. I want to, so which leaves basically mainly books, right? Because I think everything that's on the internet is going to be gone. Anything that's ever happened on the internet is going to obviously disappear because of, it's just not a very permanent kind of storage. Anything that involves electricity or the interconnection of computers. But books can have the best chance of persisting through time. And I sort of want to see this, it's just a game really, but the game is what would people of the future only know about our time, and that they would probably only be able to really know about it through books. So
Yeah, that seems really good for your mental health, doing that. Do you notice differences in how your mind works during the periods when you do use Twitter?
I can't use it at all anymore because I just feel it makes me too self-involved. I have a tendency to, like all of us do, to be self-involved anyway. And then it just makes me very desperate for attention and thinking about myself through other people's eyes. And I'm becoming like almost allergic to it. Like I become addicted to it when I get on Twitter, and then I just feel so averse to being to cultivating that person.
Yeah, me too. Do you still have people sending you tweets, like friends who are on Twitter?
What do you mean sending me tweets?
Or just showing you stuff that's happening on Twitter? Because you must have a lot of friends who use Twitter, right?
Yeah, my boyfriend sometimes like shows me thing, or my brother does, but no.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like the likes aspect is really bad for people's mental health. Just every time you get a like, you feel good for a moment, but it's just from seeing a number, and then that can make you feel like, or make it can satisfy your socializing, but in a way where you're not actually interacting with anyone.
Yeah.
Good, you have the willpower to just get off of it. I feel like so many people are just addicted to it.
Um, it helps that I didn't have, I kept, deleting my account and then starting a new one and deleting my account and starting a new one. So I always restarted from 0 followers. So I feel like by like the 4th or 5th time I went off, I didn't have so many followers. So I didn't feel like I was losing a lot of money. I think there's a way of like looking at your followers. Like if you have, I don't know, 14,000 followers, it's like having $14,000. There's a way in which it feels like, how would I throw away all this money?
Mm.
But if you don't have that much money, it doesn't feel as bad to throw it away.
Yeah, that's a good strategy. And then the way you're doing it, you're still getting good promotion, I feel like, because when you do come back, everyone's so excited and you get so much engagement. So it's like you're using it in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go on again because I'm going to be teaching a class in November, and I love teaching and I want people to know about it. So I feel like there are reasons to be on it now and then.
Yeah, I'm always trying to control my usage. Like the past few days since my book is coming out, I'm getting so many likes and retweets, it just messes with my mind.
I feel like you like messing with your mind more than I do in general.
Yeah, not in this way though. Like I don't feel like I'm using a drug that I like. It just feels like I'm addicted.
Yeah, I enjoy reading about your experiments with drugs and your use of drugs, especially in your last book, the scene where you do that drug with the woman that you think is sort of spying on you, and that's one of the funniest scenes I've ever read in any book. I just think it's like such. I mean, it's sad and heartbreaking, but also very funny.
Mm.
I feel like I do drink coffee, but I don't. I'm sort of afraid of drugs, really, like a kid,
Yeah, you've told me about using mushrooms before, right?
hmm Yeah, It's not that I've never had any bad experiences, particularly on drugs, but I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah. Um, yeah, I would just be afraid of fucking up my brain.
Mm. That's good to protect your brain.
Well, I don't know. Um, I'm gonna look at the Q&A and see if there's anything good. Um, how do you see the characters and style of your novel Taipei now after reading Leaf Society? That's a good question. Yeah, because there's such a disaffection in those characters and yeah, how do you see those characters?
I I don't know. That was also autobiographical, so I just think of it as how I was back then in 2011. And the style now I see Taipei as having a really specific style and tone that now I feel like I was addicted to using this tone where life is just bleak and dark, but it's also funny, or the narrator is partly amused by it. That tone, I feel like writing in that tone, it can also make me have that tone in real life. And after that book, I tried to get away from that tone.
Here's a question. Why do you believe we strayed into dominator society? This is from Rupert.
I'm not sure. There have been theories about that. Like, people have come up with factors that contributed to that. One of them is that people started riding horses around 6,500 years ago. And that might have given some people who were already more dominator oriented the power to be more powerful than other places and able to conquer them. And then it could be just that humans always have some dominator aspect in them. And then at a certain point, Terence McKenna argues this, that at a certain point, people stopped using psychedelics as much. And he thinks that the psychedelics suppressed the dominator aspects to some degree, and that caused people to become more dominator. And there's other ones. I can't think of any right now.
Russ Faust asks, I don't know if I'm pronouncing the last name right. Do you plan on returning to society? And I guess the question would also be like, how do you feel like you've left society?
I feel like I'm still leaving society, and that it's a never-ending process. Because I mean dominator society when I say leave society. And it can be as small as just like not reading a certain website or reading a book instead of a website. And I feel like I'm constantly working on stuff like that, and on just being more patient and compassionate and in control of my emotions. So in terms of that, I don't want to return to society, to being depressed and upset a lot and feeling meaningless.
And what do you think about ambition? Because is that a dominator emotion? Like I've been thinking a lot about creativity and ambition. And can you talk a little bit about how you see that? Because there is a desire to make things that seems partnership. And then again, yeah, I guess this goes back to the first question in some way. There's a way of making things that has to do with one's own personal ambition and wanting to be seen as great or wanting to be the best. And how do you experience those two different things if you do? And how do they influence how you work or how you are in the world?
I think they can be two separate things. The ambition to just create something and the ambition to be great. And I feel like I'm always struggling to just try to have the first ambition. I feel like everyone in dominator society is trained a lot to want the second ambition, to want to be the best and have the most readers and the best reviews and everything. Yeah, and it's hard to resist all that. it feels also like a lifelong thing to try to minimize, to try to just be ambitious in partnership qualities, like having ambition to be really calm and helpful to people instead of to like win an award. It's hard to focus on those ambitions, I feel like. What do you think about those two kinds of ambition?
Yeah, I feel the same way as you do. And I, especially lately, have been feeling like it's never occurred to me that I can slow down, even just in the course of a day. And I feel like my whole life I've been rushed. And I'm not sure who, it's not like I'm blaming a particular person for rushing me, but there's always been this sense of being rushed. And I think ambition is a kind of rushing too. And it feels like a poison. Like I don't like jealousy, which I do experience. I feel like that's anything I can do to sort of purge myself of it is the right thing to do, because it's a distortion of what happens in art, which is that everybody is creative and people make things, and that's all there is to it. And humans have always made things, and we make things for each other, and there's nothing more to it than that. But it's turned into something whereby we have heroes and there's people that are better. I asked you once in an email some question that I was asking you about. I think I just asked you, like, why is your writing so good, or why are you such a good writer? I was reading one of your books and I just was kind of overcome. And you replied with something like, I don't know what's good writing or not good writing, or I don't have, you just kind of like made it clear that like that wasn't even a scale for you. And I love that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I feel like that is in me. I'm just constantly trying to promote the other view that there's no good or bad in art.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I feel like just the whole literary world promotes the other view a lot.
Yeah.
That there is good and bad, and there's like the 10 best books each year and stuff like that. And I feel like that has an effect on everyone. Just the difference between titling a list the 10 best books and like our 10 favorite books or something. I feel like that has an effect.
Yeah, it does. And it makes everyone a worse artist, I think.
Yeah, by making them taking up some of their mind by thinking they have to want to be the best. Yeah, I feel like it does affect art. Like I wonder what novels would be like in a totally partnership society where no one's thinking of trying to be the best.
Well, I think something like this book, I mean, that's why I think I started with that question, because it didn't seem like this book was trying to be the best. That's always been a quality sort of like in your books, that there's a kind of, it's like an expression of an individuality more than a kind of trying to triumph or to seem impressive. I think part of what happens in a dominator society to books is that people write books to make themselves look impressive. And I feel like your books definitely aren't, you're not trying to show off your intelligence or your sensitivity or, yeah. That I've always found them warm for that reason.
Yeah, maybe in dominator societies, the books are on average longer. I don't know.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because I
was gonna,
feel like in Japan, there's a lot of short books, I feel like. Like one of the major prizes is for books under 30,000 words or something, the
oh wow.
Utagawa prize or something. But what were you gonna say?
One of my earlier questions that I was going to ask you is, do you ever want to write a really long book?
Yeah, I've thought about wanting to, but but not as much anymore, maybe. Now I'm more interested in shorter books. One thing is, if I wrote a longer book, I would feel much less eager to like email it to my friends, or I just feel like I'd be taking up so much of their time. The shorter a book I write, the more just like friendly I feel to all my friends. What do
How
you
many of
think?
your friends? Oh, well, I think not that my books are perfect or that I'm aiming for perfection, but I do like to go over every page a lot and make it as I want it to be. And though I do sometimes think, oh, wouldn't it be amazing to write an 800-page book? I'm not sure why I think that, but I don't know how I would, because how would I spend enough time on every page making it good? Like, how
Yeah,
can you care as much about every page and
yeah,
sentence?
yeah. I've wondered about that, how people can write 800-page words, because the longer it gets, it just seems the harder it is to edit each page, because you have to be aware of the whole book. It seems like you would
Mhm.
need to just be isolated for years working on it.
Or not care as much about every sentence and page.
Yeah, yeah. Like with Knausgaard, he just openly didn't care about editing it, right?
Yeah, I think that was, I look at those books as kind of performance art,
Yeah.
um, in that way. Here's the first question you got was, is everything you can imagine real?
I feel like, yeah, it could be, in that maybe anything you can imagine, it exists somewhere at some time in some universe, or somewhere in the universe. That would support the theory that after you die, you can come back and live any life, because we can go on a computer and create any world. Or if we had better technology, I think I lost my argument, or what I was talking about.
Well, the follow-up question is, if so, how do you dream a better dream and include others in the dream?
A better dream. If the dream is referring to life, then you just, I don't know, you just be aware that you have some control over your life, and start trying to write your life in the way that you like it. And you can just include other people if you want, I guess.
Um, do you like this book a lot?
Yeah, I do. I like it more than my other books, and in a different way, because I don't have to just talk about myself when people ask me about it, because there's all these books and ideas that I've put in there. And I like promoting those ideas in books, and just reminding myself of those ideas, and they're ideas that help me in my life. Whereas with Taipei, I didn't include any nonfiction or other people's ideas. So most of the time I just wouldn't know what to talk about with those. So I like this book.
Um, have you a feeling that the people that have been reading it, I assume that you've read some of the reviews, are taking it the way that you are reading it in a way that is making you happy?
Yeah. There haven't been any, there have been reviews from Publishers Weekly and Kirkus that were negative. but all the other reviews so far, I feel like that they've understood it to a big degree. The review by Dean Kissick and one by Alex Perez, I thought they really liked the book. And then the New York Times review, it had a lot of nice stuff to say. It did seem to go out of its way to give judgment, like a rating on the book. It said it wasn't great.
I saw that, and it said also the last couple lines, which you said in your tweet, which was that you were unhappy that that you disagreed with the last couple of lines, and the last couple of lines are that more or less that Lee hopes to achieve transcendence, but won't. But the reviewer thinks that he won't. And I also disagreed with that. I didn't understand why that was her point of view, because, well, he does. And in the very last line where the dog shows Lee and Kay a leaf, like to me, that is a beautiful image of cooperation between the animal and the people and the leaf, and discovering a new world. And the leaf is this growing thing. I mean, I thought it was a very optimistic, sort of very subtly transcendent end.
Yeah. And one of my friends said he thought the last line was funny. The last line was just this seems doubtful about Lee becoming happy or something. And I thought it does seem kind of funny. Like, she's just noticing that this character is trying really hard, but even in the last 100 pages, he's still like feeling himself going insane and just having times where he's really upset. So maybe she's saying that and just thinking like he's always going to be like that.
How many friends do you think you had read this book in draft form?
Probably up until the time it came out, maybe like 20.
And do you listen to the feedback? Like, what do you show friends your book for? Does it change it, what they say?
I've changed small things, but by the time I showed anyone, it was pretty much finished or in the late draft. And a lot of the friends, I traded books with them. We just happened to have books that were near finished or coming out, like with you too. We both happened to finish our last 2 books at around the same time, so we traded with those. And I really like trading. It's just like a really long email to a friend, and they're sending you a really long email too, and then discussing it afterwards is good too. Mm-hmm. You show a lot of friends your work before, right?
Yeah, I like seeing it through other minds. Like, I like showing a friend the book, and while it's in progress, and reading their response and knowing based on their response, not that they tell me what I should do, but I can tell from what they pick up. I think, oh, that's not what I wanted, or they're not enthusiastic enough about the book, or I just sort of gauge that. I just use that as I externalize my own mind, and then it gives me motivation to keep working and making it better.
Yeah, I feel like motivation's a big part of it too. It gives me more motivation. Like, if before I send a friend something, I might edit it again with a lot of motivation, thinking it through their perspective. That helps.
If there's one book that you recommend, like one of the nonfiction books that you recommend people read after reading this book, which one would you say?
Maybe just The Chalice and the Blade by Riane Eisler, because it talks about the partnership dominator thing, and that's a pretty big part of the book. And people have been asking me about that in podcasts.
I feel like I really love your parents, so please tell them that there's I don't know if they've read the book yet, but there's just such a amazing tenderness and the complexity of a long-term relationship that as is expressed between the mother and the father is I haven't seen a long-term relationship and what a bond really looks like in all its complexity and its positive aspects and its painful aspects. So it's such beautiful detail, but you feel like so much love for both of them. Yeah, it's really moving.
Yeah, I'll tell them. My mom might be watching this right now.
Oh, great.
I think she is.
Well, I think we've been talking for about an hour. Is there anything more that you want to say?
I don't know. I don't think so. Besides, I recommend people get your next novel. It's coming out in January.
February, yeah. It's called Pure Color.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it a lot and seeing parallels in my book too.
Yeah, I feel like we're both trying to move towards something similar.
Yeah, the mystical thing. I was thinking about that. Maybe it's because we've written so much just focused on relationships and realism. And you had sent me that email where Knausgaard seemed to be moving towards the mystical too, and he's written so much about just normal life. So maybe it's that, just wanting to, feeling like we finished with the material world and want to see what else there is.
Yeah, I think there's that exactly. And also, what do people need? And I include myself, and you probably include yourself in people. Like, I think for a long time I felt like, oh, literature's too artificial. Let's try to write books. And I was interested in reading books that were less artificial, that looked really more closely at what a human life actually feels like rather than novels imitating novels. And I think now maybe we've had so much realism or this hyper realism, at least in the novels that I have been reading and loving. And now, yeah, I need something different. Like, I want to know what other minds can conceive of that's still realism. Like, I still think all the stuff that you're talking about is a kind of realism. Like, I don't think it's imagination detached from truth. I think it's an imagination that comes out of like a close attentiveness to reality. So it's still attending to reality, but it's seeing more.
Yeah, it's just seeing reality more accurately, because in reality there is the imagination and life after death and all these non-material things.
The mystery, yeah. It's like paying more attention to the mysterious things that connect the material.
Yeah, having a bigger context for your work, including all this stuff that is unknown too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, it's been so nice to talk to you, and
Yeah, thank you for doing.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me.
I enjoyed it a lot.
Too.
Thank you so much, Tao, Sheila, everyone who asked questions. It was incredible. And if anyone missed any of that for any reason, we'll have it on YouTube soon. Good Society. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye, Sheila.
Bye, everybody. Bye. Bye, Tao.